Okay, great stuff. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Thursday afternoon session that will be done with Ken on operational planning and forecasting. Welcome to all the corporates who are looking for maybe some support or training on planning and forecasting, and also welcome to all our SMME owners who are looking for support as well. So I'm going to hand over to Ken. Ken is certainly no stranger in this area. He's quite the guru, so I'm sure you will be in wonderful hands for the session with Ken. Welcome, Ken.
Liesl, thanks very much. I'm not so sure about the guru bit. Guru? One of the two anyway. Good. All right. Well, welcome everybody. What I want to do this afternoon is really go through some of the material that is part of a course that SAPEX and BizCo are offering to the SMME community. And we're going to be talking about operational planning and forecasting. So I'm just going to be going through a summary of what is included in that course. And if you need more details, of course, you can get hold of SAPEX and they will help you along those lines. So operational planning and forecasting. Well, it all boils down to inventory, doesn't it? And inventory is an incredible, important part of your business. In fact, inventory is the lifeblood of your business. The flow of that inventory through your business, it's like the blood flowing through your body. Also, inventory is probably one of the biggest assets that a business has. And so it's very important that we have people in our organizations that are highly educated, highly trained, and highly empowered to look after this most valuable asset within in our businesses. So understanding about having the right inventory in the right place at the right time is incredibly important. And remember that when inventory stands still in a warehouse or anywhere in the supply chain, it is costing you money. And so we want material to flow as quickly as possible through the supply chain, keeping the costs down and maintaining the service levels. So finding the right balance of having the right amount of inventory, not too much, not too little, is a real challenge when it comes to business. Now, of course, if we have inventory in our supply chain, it's costing us money, and quite a considerable amount of money, in fact, because we have a carrying cost. If we have a warehouse with some inventory in there, it's costing us money. First of all, we have to spend the money to buy the inventory or make the inventory if we're manufacturing, and that can be quite an amount of cash that we're laying out to put inventory in this warehouse. But of course, once we've got this inventory, we need somewhere to keep it, and so we need a warehouse, and every square meter in your warehouse is costing you money. We need racking, we need forklift trucks, we need labor to look after that inventory and move it through the warehouse, to receive it, look after it, and then issue it at the end of the day. And also we need to insure that inventory, because if there's a disaster, a fire or a flood, and the inventory gets damaged, then of course we need to recover that money. And of course, then we've got the risk costs of people stealing it from us, perhaps, or it going past its sell-by date and we have to throw it away, or in worst case scenario, that inventory could become obsolete and nobody wants it anymore, and so we have to get rid of it. So the carrying cost of inventory is incredibly high. We also have costs of ordering inventory. That's not free. We need procurement managers and buyers, and they need office space and internet connections and telephones and all those lovely things. They need tea, coffee, and toilet rolls, and they need a portion of the computer system. So actually placing orders for stock is also very expensive. So those are two very important costs you must work out in your business: the cost of carrying inventory in your supply chain and the cost of ordering inventory in your supply chain. I find very few companies that actually get around to doing that. Very few companies I've been to, I've said, what does it cost you to order your materials? What does it cost you to carry them? People cannot tell me, and I think it's important that you go and measure that. Cash flow implications as well. The cash to cash cycle time we talk about, the time from when we order the raw materials and pay for them to the point where the finished product gets sent to the customer and we get paid for it, we have to finance the inventory in between those 2 points. And so getting your cash to cash flow as low as possible, that cash to cash flow cycle time as low as possible, incredibly important as well. And then the last one there, which really comes into those carrying costs, which is the cost of write-offs. And as I said before, maybe people don't want it anymore. We've got to throw it away or give it away or dispose of it in some way. That is costing us money. Now, what about customer demand? All right, so pretty broad customer categories, really. We have demand. On the slide here, you see that I have a physical need for something. I have a physical need for bread, but I really want a gluten-free bread to eat. So we're creating demand for a specific type of product. And we call this demand shaping. And so demand from our customers can be anything from basic needs to, well, what would they prefer or what they really want. And so we need to understand our customer demand. And this is where the forecasting comes in, really, doesn't it? So some of the basic demands from our customer. And what are they looking for from us? Well, if you look on the left-hand side here, starting on the left-hand side, they're looking for improved customer service. People want good service. They also want better quality as well. And I think quality is a given today. We expect things to do what they are supposed to do. We expect good quality. We want greater flexibility in product offerings as well, perhaps. We want our products to be slightly different to our neighbors next door, perhaps. So we need to be able to modify those products in such a way, possibly. Quicker delivery is becoming very important now, isn't it? We've got Checkers with their 60/60. We've got Amazon delivering by drones. People may take a while to decide they need your product, but when they decide they need it, they want it very quickly. And so delivery, availability on shelf is very important, isn't it? If it's a make-to-stock product, you must have it available. You must be able to pick it and deliver it to the customer very quickly. Next one is low cost, but I would prefer to use the word value here. I think people are looking for good value. And it's not necessarily about the cost. It's about what am I getting for what I'm actually paying. And so having the right value to the customer is very important, I think. And reliability and availability. I've mentioned availability. Availability on shelf for make-to-stock products, absolutely critical and very important, because if your product is not on the shelf, they're going to pick somebody else's product. And of course, it's not about doing it right once, it's about doing it right all the time. Having that reliability in the supply chain can be quite incredibly important as well. And of course, if we do have poor customer service, this can be quite a high cost to our business. So a very high cost for poor service, because we do something and then maybe we have to do it again because we didn't give the customer what they were looking for. So there is a cost of service quality. And I think if you look on the slide here, there's 5 important consequences of providing poor service in your business. And the first one there is blemished reputation, or you could be damaging your brand name. Leads don't result in sales because people hear that maybe your service is not that good or the quality of the products is not that good. Long-standing customers can very easily change to another brand if they find there becomes a problem with the brand they've been used to. You could find that your best employees are resigning from the organization because you're not providing their customers with good service. And then, of course, we get into that vicious circle of dwindling profits and the business starts going downhill. So providing excellent customer service is really an enormous must, isn't it? Now we need to have a vision, a mission, and some values in our business. We need to, people need to understand why they come to work every day. Why do I come to work? What is our vision in the organization? We've got an example on the board here, which is the vision in this particular company is a world free of motor neuron disease. So obviously this is a company in the medical field, and this is their vision. They want to see a world where we don't have any of this particular problem in our population, this motor neuron disease. So that's their vision. They want to see this eliminated. But what is the mission of this organization? And if we read on the slide there, it says to support people with motor neuron disease, their families and careers through advocacy, home and professional support. So we're giving, that's our mission, is to give support to these people out there. And then we might have some values in our organization. And this is just an example, of course, to enable people with motor neuron deficiency or disease to live an active, independent citizen, to empower people with MND to make informed decisions, and to put people with MND at the heart of our focus, and to ensure that people with this problem have a voice by advocating on their behalf, etc., etc. So we need to have a vision. What do we want to see in this world ultimately? And what's our mission when we come to work every day? This is our mission, and these are the values that we're going to adhere to. So very important that people in your organization understand what these things are, why they come to work every day. But of course, we need to understand strategy and long, medium, and short-term planning. So in a business, we will have a strategic plan, we'll have a tactical plan, and we'll have an operational plan. Long-term strategic plans probably go out anywhere between 2 and 10 years. I find most companies, medium-sized companies, probably have a long-term strategic plan for 3 to 5 years. Putting a strategic plan out there for 10 years can be a little bit of a problem because there's so many things happening in the world that can upset that strategic plan that you've really got to go and change it. So probably about 5 years is about average. However, if you are a huge chemical company, power generation, fuel, petrol refinery, you're probably going to even have a 10 or 20-year plan going out there. And then we have a medium-term tactical plan, which really only goes out probably about 12 to 18 months, 24 months. And then we have a short operational plan that really is looking at what are we going to be doing today, this week, maybe this month, etc. I always try and relate this to taking a trip on the road. So, you know, if you want to drive from Cape Town to Johannesburg, for example, that's our strategy. I want to drive from Cape Town to Johannesburg, and I want to be able to do it in a certain period of time or arrive on a particular date. Then there's the tactical plan, because as I'm driving from Cape Town to Johannesburg, when I get to Three Sisters, I can make a decision. I can make a tactical decision to either go through Kimberley up the N12, or I can carry on the N1 and go on to Joburg. Maybe I've heard there's a problem on the N1, there's a big accident and there's a holdup, so I'll make a tactical decision to divert at this point and go up the N12. Short-term operational things that we're looking at when we're driving from Cape Town to Johannesburg is we're looking at the road in front of us, okay? And we're looking for potholes and cars that are in the way or pedestrians running across the road. So these are the operational things we're looking at. Tactically, we're making a decision as to which way we're going to turn at the next junction. And then strategically, we want to see where it is we want to be going in the future. We also need to understand about stakeholders in our business. Okay, now stakeholders are pretty important in our business, and there are a number of them. and some of them are internal, and some of them are external stakeholders. So the internal stakeholders are, I would say, the most important stakeholders internally are you. It's the people that work in the organization. You may not be an investor in the business, but you're investing your time and you want to see that business grow so that you can grow, and you want to see that business continuing into the future. And so you are a stakeholder in the business. Okay, and the managers are stakeholders. The owner of the business is a stakeholder. That owner could be a privately owned company, or if it's a publicly owned company, then we've got external stakeholders, and they are the people that have invested in the organization. But we also have other stakeholders like customers and suppliers. Customers are a stakeholder in your business because they are hoping that you're going to be able to supply them with some products that they can use or that they can sell down the supply chain, and that you're going to continue in business so they can continue in business. Same thing with your suppliers. Your suppliers are a stakeholder in your business because if you fold, they're not going to be able to supply anything, and that's going to affect their business. But there's also the community in which you work is also a stakeholder in your business. So you want to be a good company within your community. You know, don't want to be polluting the air or polluting the water within your community. You want to be providing employment for the people, good employment for the people within your business. So stakeholders are incredibly important to your business. Internally now, and we're talking now more about manufacturing, but you need to have a good manufacturing planning and control system. And I find it quite incredible that I go to many businesses and they have absolutely no way of planning and controlling themselves. They're working off spreadsheets and bits of paper, and they don't know what's happening tomorrow. They don't even know what's going to be happening this afternoon. And this is absolutely terrible, really, because we have the tools to be able to plan and control ourselves properly, particularly in manufacturing. And this is the anchor chart that we call this the anchor chart for a manufacturing planning and control system, which we've been using for decades. If you look on the left-hand side here, this is all about the demand on the business. And we need to understand the demand on the business. We need to have a demand plan, okay? Because if we don't understand what the demand is on the business, how on earth can we organize and plan the supply? So it's very important that the demand plan, what I call a consensus demand plan, forecasting and consensus demand plan. I find a lot of companies don't even do this really well either. So putting in a good consensus demand plan is absolutely important. Once we've got a reasonable idea of what the customers are going to require from us into the future, we can then feed that into what we call the sales and operations planning process within the business. Here, top management get together and they decide, what are we going to make? What are we going to sell? And what are we going to stock? Okay, in broad product families. This is not in detail. And this is probably going out 18 to 24 months, because in this process, we need to determine when do we need to significantly change our capacity. And that can take a long time. If you need to put in a new production line or buy a new production machine, for example, it's not something you can do overnight. You have to plan it. You have to put it on the budget this year so you can spend the money next year. So we need to know 18 months, plus minus 18 months into the future, when we're going to need to significantly increase our capacity. And so that's where this reasonable demand plan comes in. It's going to give us a reasonable idea as to when that might need to happen. And of course, that's where we look at this resource plan on the right-hand side here. When do we need to significantly change our capacity? Or do we have sufficient capacity to satisfy the demand that we're currently getting. Of course, sales and operations planning is also being driven by strategy and the business plan as well. Once we have an aggregate plan, a sales and operations plan, we can then pass that down to the master production scheduler. Out of that SNOP process, we have what we call the production plan. It is authorizing the manufacturing facility to go and manufacture to certain levels in the organization. And that then goes down to the master scheduler who takes that aggregate plan and disaggregates it down into individual stock keeping units that we're going to manufacture. So the master production scheduler would say, I want to build 10,000 of these parts in this particular time period and have them in the warehouse available for our customers. Again, we need to do a capacity check to see if we have sufficient capacity to produce that currently in our factory. If not, then we need to go and rehash the master schedule again to make sure. So we don't want to pass a plan down the planning hierarchy unless we know we've got a reasonable chance of being able to manufacture in the plant. Once we have this master production schedule, we can use that to drive the materials requirements planning process. So materials requirements planning really says, oh, Mr. Master or Mrs. Master Scheduler, if that's what you want in the warehouse in those quantities in this time period, this is what you better go and manufacture, how many and when you need to make them. And this is what you need to go and buy, how many and when you need to buy them. And so we will create purchase orders and manufacturing orders out of the materials requirements planning process. If you've got a very complex manufacturing environment, you might want to use a capacity requirements planning system as well to look at all the resources in the factory to make sure that we have sufficient resources to build the product. So very briefly, we can spend several days going through a manufacturing planning and control system in a lot more detail as to how it works, but that's just a bit of a summary really. So demand planning and management is incredibly important, as I mentioned to you before. Having a reasonable idea. You can't get an accurate idea, okay? There's no such thing as an accurate forecast. It's what we call an oxymoron. You can't put the word accurate and forecast in the same sentence, because if you had an accurate forecast, it would be an actual demand, wouldn't it? So we have to forecast our demand in the business, and we need a reasonable idea of what that's going to be. So as we mentioned before in the sales and operations planning, we can get an idea of the amount of capacity that we might need to produce that plan or that demand plan. And what I often say to people is you should make that demand plan unconstrained. So if you had all the resources in the world, what could you actually sell of your product? So we have an unconstrained forecast or demand plan. We can then look at that demand plan and say, well, we've got limited resources. So what should we go and take out of that demand plan? Which are the best companies, the best orders to go and deal with? So let's go and deal with the best ones and leave the other, what I call the rats and mice to our competitors. Okay, so having a good demand planning process is very important. And the start of any demand management process is forecasting. And when it comes to forecasting, you need to get yourself a reasonable tool. Don't start doing things on a spreadsheet with moving averages, because that's pretty useless. Get yourself a statistical forecasting tool and use that to generate a forecast into the future. And of course, we need to understand things like what's the time horizon we're going to be forecasting. Are we going to be forecasting for a month or two? Are we going to be forecasting for a year, a couple of years, 5 years? And what sort of level of detail are we going to be forecasting at? Are we going to be forecasting at a particular customer, salesman, product, or are we going to be looking at it in more aggregate terms? We probably need to do all of those things. So what I normally do is get people to forecast at the greatest level by customer, by product, by region, by product brand perhaps, or product family. And then we can aggregate that up. So at detail level, we need that detail level for the master production scheduler, so you can create that master schedule. We need it in aggregate in product family for the sales and operations planning process. And then we need it in total for strategic planning. Okay, so we have generally different levels that we forecast, but they must all be generated from the same detailed level. We also need to understand how good we are at forecasting. What is our typical forecast error? Because if I am your master scheduler and I know that our forecasting ability is only, say, 75% accuracy, I can take account of that by putting extra safety stock into the warehouse based on the ability of us to forecast. So knowing your forecast error, your ability to forecast is very important. So we need to have that measure as well. And as I mentioned, we need to forecast not only at the detail level, but at the family group levels for sales and operations planning, and then for a total at the top for strategic planning. And of course, we always want to try and get better accuracy as well. And just remember, there's 3 rules of forecasting. 1, forecasts are always wrong, and they always will be. And if you get it right, then it's like winning the lottery. And I guess not many of you have done that, otherwise you wouldn't be sitting here listening to me. We know that nearer periods of time, so to forecast what's going to happen tomorrow is very much easier as to forecast what's going to happen in the next 3, 6, or 9 months' time. And we also know that as we aggregate up our forecasts, they become more and more and more accurate. So if I aggregate my forecast right up to the total at the top, and I ask you, what's your turnover going to be in your business this year? You might be plus or minus 5% out. At product family level, maybe you're going to be about, I don't know, 70% accurate, 70, 80% accurate. But probably at SKU level, detailed level, you're probably only going to be about 50% accurate. If you're doing 50%, you're probably doing pretty well. So manufacturing planning and control, that production planning, that sales and operate, the output from that sales and operations planning. What are we doing there? Well, as I mentioned, we're planning what are we going to make, what are we going to sell, and what are we going to stock. Okay, so if you're in a make to stock business, you're going to be looking at what are our planned stock levels. However, you may be in a make to order business and you only make things when you get an order from the customer. So therefore, you want to be looking at the planned backlog in the business. What is the backlog? If I tell my customers that they give me an order, I will deliver it in 2 weeks. That's the lead time to make their product. I've got to make sure that my planned backlog is not greater than 2 weeks. Because if it's 3 weeks, if I've got 3 weeks of work on the factory and the customer gives me an order, I'm not going to be able to make it for him until 3 weeks is up. And I'm telling him 2 weeks. So managing that backlog is very important in a make to order business. Of course, there are some manufacturing companies that are both make to stock and make to order. So they have to manage these things. We also have to know what the customer service levels are that we've given our customer. And I think one of the most important policies, which I see a huge lack of in most businesses, is a customer service policy, which is given to the customers. So they understand what the rules are in the supply chain as far as customer service is concerned. And I see a great lack of that. Efficient asset utilization as well. You know, the assets we've got in our business are machines, we've got materials, we've got men, we've got people, and we need to use them as efficiently as possible in our organization. So that's something else we need to look at. And of course, we need to maintain those sound labor relations at the end of the day as well. So when we're preparing a production plan, we have to take the different types of businesses into account. As we said, if you're a make to stock company, you must make sure that you always have stock available for your customers. In a make-to-order business, you need to make sure that you can adhere to that lead time that you quoted the customer for the product. In assemble-to-order business, it's a bit like make-to-order, but we're tending to just have the final assembly in place. A bit like a motor car assembly plant. A motor car assembly plant doesn't actually make any parts. They get all the parts and the sub-assemblies in, and all they're doing is assembling it. So depending on what type of business you're in, the type of production plans you're going to be putting together are going to be slightly different. We mentioned before the capacity planning is incredibly important, and we need to make sure when we make plans in the business that we have the ability to produce those products. And I see companies that they just go out and keep accepting orders, and there's no ways they're going to be able to make them in the time available because they just don't have the resources to be able to do that. They just don't have the capacity. And so it's very important, as I mentioned earlier on, when we make the master production schedule, this is what the master scheduler would like the company to manufacture in these quantities, in these time periods, going out into the future. And that can be generally in South Africa here about 6 months. The master schedule goes out about 6 months because that is the time period it's the cumulative lead time for our product. So a lot of us are importing products. It takes 3 to 4 months to get raw materials and components. It takes us maybe a month to put them together to make the product. And on a look ahead period. So 6 months is a typical master schedule. So the master scheduler is determining what we're going to make in what quantities going out 6 months. And then running the rough cut capacity planning, looking at the critical resources, not all the resources, but the critical ones, the bottleneck resources, the ones where we have a problem. If we can get the work through the bottlenecks or those critical resources, then we assume that we will have sufficient capacity elsewhere. And then, of course, once we have that master schedule, we use those numbers to drive materials requirements planning. And that tells us what we need to manufacture, how many and when we need to manufacture them. And I said, if you've got a very complex manufacturing plant, then you might want to be looking at capacity requirements planning to look at all those work centers within your manufacturing plant and make sure that you're going to have sufficient capacity to be able to produce those products on time. So capacity planning, incredibly important. Something I see missing in a lot of businesses. It's like they create a master schedule and it becomes a wish list. Oh, I wish we could make all these things. I haven't the faintest idea whether we can make them because we don't do any capacity planning. But don't worry, the factory will find some way of making them. And that's very unfair on the factory because we put a lot of pressure on the factory. And then they have to work overtime and weekends, and people don't like that over long periods, and the quality is going to go down. So make sure you're doing proper capacity planning in your business. So yeah, well, rough cut capacity planning I mentioned there. Rough cut capacity planning is about looking at the critical resources, as I mentioned, not all the resources, but just the critical ones. When it comes down to capacity requirements planning, now that's pretty complicated because we're going to look at each and every resource. We're going to schedule each and every works order going through the factory so we know exactly when that works order is going to be at that work center and how much time that work center is going to be required to manufacture, set up and manufacture that product. And so capacity requirements planning is incredibly complicated, and thank goodness we have computer systems that will do it for us. It is very, very complicated. And then of course, ideally we need a finite scheduling system in the factory so we can finitely schedule each and every one of those works orders going through the factory. So we know when we're going to start each order and when we're going to start and finish each order at each operation at each work center, and when the job will be finished at the end of the day. If we do that, we can then track that job through the factory, and we can see if any particular works order is ahead of schedule or behind schedule or on schedule. If a job's behind schedule, I could change its priority so that it jumps queues and gets through the factory faster. If something is ahead of schedule, I can slow it down a little bit. So I can change the priority on the works orders to try and make sure that they're coming out at the right time. What about capacity management? We said it's very, very important. I talk about nameplate capacity. So if I go to Europe and I buy a production machine and the salesman tells me it'll manufacture 100 components per hour, and I'm thinking, 8-hour shift, 100 components an hour. Yeah, it's 800 parts a shift. Yeah, that should be all right. I'll buy that. But when I get it back to my factory in Cape Town here, I realized that, hold on a minute, we don't actually work 8 hours. We only work maybe 6.5 hours a day because there's lunch breaks and tea breaks and wee breaks and other breaks. And so there's a utilization. We're only utilizing the machine for 6.5 hours out of the 8 hours available in the shift. So 6.5 hours times 100 should get about 650 a shift out of the machine then. But then there's the efficiency, particularly when you've got a new piece of equipment in the factory. It's probably not going to work at 100% efficiency because people are learning how to use it. Okay, so there could be an efficiency factor that I need to put in as well. And once I get the machine, so let's say I put an efficiency factor in, and I think I'm only going to get 600 units per shift out of this particular machine. But once it starts working, I get what I call the demonstrated capacity. And it may demonstrate to me over a shift that I can only really, at this moment in time, get 500 out of this machine per shift. Now, the important thing is when we do capacity planning, we plan on that 500. We don't plan on the 800 that the salesman told me, okay? Because that's what the machine is demonstrating it can do. So I need to use that number. I don't like it. I want to get a better number, and I will go down and try and improve the machine and improve the efficiency. And maybe we might get 550, demonstrated capacity of 550 out of the machine per shift. Then I will go and change the planning system to tell it that I can now do 550. So what I'm trying to get at here is always tell your system the truth, whether you like it or not. Because if you lie to your system, it will lie back to you big time. And so understanding your capacity, incredibly important. Understand your utilizations and your efficiencies and the productivity in your business. Very important. Of course, things never go according to plan. And if you think about it, the only reason we're employed is to go and fix problems, if you think about it. So solving problems in the business is very important, and understanding how to do this. Because if you look on the right-hand side here, we could have too much information about the problem. We could be spending a lot of time facts finding and paralysis by analysis, trying to analyze things, not identifying the key data that we're required, and not planning ahead, and last minute realization of time difficulty. And there's a whole bunch of problems that we can have. So we need to have a structured way of looking at problem solving, all right? And so we need to have a very clearly identify the problem. We need to write it down. We need to establish the facts and the objectives. There's a very nice way of doing this. We call it the A3. Take an A3 piece of paper. You should be able to put a complete problem down and what you're going to do about it on a piece of A3 paper. You can go and have a look at that. Calmly reviewing the options and the various ideas, focusing on the results and the desired outcome, and not preventing solutions from presenting themselves. Objectively choosing the right solution. So there's a structured way of doing these things that we need to understand. So when we get round to defining the problem, we can use the five whys. It's a very, very simple technique. But if you ask the question why 5 times, you will plus or minus 5 times, you'll generally get down to the root cause of the problem. And there's a nice little example there about a bulb blowing. But I tend to use the one which I came across. I was helping the power corporation in Botswana to put cycle counting into their warehouse. And I walked up to a guy standing in front of this big wooden bin, scratching his head. And I said, what's the problem? And he says, you know, this item in this box here, bin here, is very difficult to count. So what did I say? I said, well, why? He said, well, it's I've got some of the products. I'll tell you what they were. They were the long bolts that you use to bolt things on telegraph poles or on wooden poles. And he says, you know, some of them, they've got a few loose ones in the bottom here, but then I've got some in sacks. Now, in some of the sacks, there's 100. In others, there's 200. I've got sacks here with 250 in. It's very difficult to determine what size and how many is in a sack. So I said, well, why is that? Why? Second why. And he said, because we're a quasi-government organization, and every time we go out, we need more of these bolts. So we have to go out to tender. And every time somebody else gets the tender. And so they put the bolts in a different size bag. If I knew how many were in the bags, I could easily count the bags. We could cycle count these parts very easily. So I said, well, why is that the case? Well, I don't think procurement understand it's a problem. Why don't they understand it's a problem? Well, because we haven't told them about it. So we went down to procurement and said, look, is there a problem if we put the packaging specification on the tender document? The guy in procurement said, no problem. How many do you want in the sack? 200? Okay, 200 it is. Just make sure when you receive them, there's 200 in the sack. So by asking the question 5 times, we actually got down to the root cause of the problem. We could go and fix it. Okay, so very simple, easy technique. And of course, we've got the 5 W's and H technique to answer questions about problems, to ensure understanding of the problem. You know, we ask, well, what's the problem? Where does it happen? Why did it happen? When did it happen? Who's involved? And how are we going to fix it? And then we've got flow charts. Very important that you measure what's happening in your business. You map the process. And if you want to do this, do yourself a favor, get a book called Learning to See by John Shook, which talks about value stream mapping and how to do value stream mapping. It's a fantastic how-to book on how to do value stream mapping. So before you can do anything to improve a process, go and map the process. And I've got lots of examples of that happening. We haven't got time to go through them today. But also we've got other problem-solving techniques. We've got fishbone diagrams, Ishikawa diagrams. It was developed by Ishikawa, and a very useful tool as well, which I've used considerably. So there were about 7 tools that Ishikawa put together that he taught everybody in Toyota. It became part of the Toyota production system. So get to understand these 7 tools, teach everybody in your organization these tools, and we can use them for problem solving. How are we doing here for time? Yeah, we're not doing too badly. Okay, so teams, very important. We've spoken about this a few times in the other webinar series as well. As I mentioned, get your teams to understand these problem-solving techniques. They're not difficult to learn, and we can use them anywhere in the organization. We can use them in the warehouse, we can use them in the factory, we can use them in the offices. By the way, you can even use them in your own home, okay, to improve the way you do things. Effective decision-making. We need to understand how to make decisions effectively. We need to monitor performance. And that's another problem I find in many businesses. a lot of people measure the wrong things at the wrong point in the supply chain, or they have too many measures, or they have no measures, and these measures don't support each other. And so it's very important to understand what measures we should be putting in place. And if you want to go and have a look, I find the best place to look for measures is in the SCORE model, the Supply Chain Operations Reference Model. They give you the right metrics to put in each place in the supply chain, depending on what type of industry you are or what the attributes are of your supply chain. So I find that extremely useful. And you might want to go and look at that, putting in the right metrics so we can evaluate the performance and provide feedback. Feedback, accurate, timely feedback is very important, isn't it? It's no good telling somebody at the end of the month, oh, we didn't quite make budget and there's not much we can do about it. Now, if we get feedback daily on our performance, we can perhaps do something about it to achieve our objectives at the end of the month. And of course, we want to reward achievements as well, don't we? Okay, so team performance, very important. It's all about developing good teams in your business, teams that can work together, they become productive, and they can provide a huge amount of success to your business, having good teams. And we need to organize those teams properly. So we need to formulate the goals and the objectives of those teams. People need to know how they're going to get measured, what the goals are of what it is they do, what the objectives are. People generally want to do a good job, but they need to understand what that job is. And we need to understand how to delegate properly and control those jobs as well. And utilizing our resources optimally, making sure that we're getting the best use out of our people and our machines and our materials. And of course, motivating employees at the end of the day so that we've got a good motivated team. Maybe it's hasn't been so easy over the last year and a half with a lot of us working at home. Maybe it's become a little bit more difficult to motivate people, but we need to find ways of being able to do that, to motivate them and give them what they want as well as what we want as well. And most definitely make training and education a priority in your business, because the way we do business has changed since I've been involved. Just in the supply chain over the last 30 years, I've had to learn, unlearn, and relearn because things are changing all the time. So continuous training and education is an absolute must for anybody. And I always tell people that you should always be learning something new. You should always be sitting in a class at some stage learning something new. And if you're not sitting in a class, you should be standing up in front of the class, actually giving the class, because that is where you learn. You learn by teaching. And then we want the positive performance reviews, don't we? So that kind of brings me to the end of today's session. And it's all about education and training. Just make sure that you've got that in place within your organization, because I see so many companies where they have good employees, but they don't really understand what they should be doing because they haven't been given the opportunity to learn, unlearn, and relearn as we go through time. So, Cindy, are you there? Has somebody been looking at the questions or queries? Hello, is there anybody there?
Ken, there hasn't been too many questions, but what I did see a question on is, will the PowerPoint slides be available in PowerPoint?
I'm not sure about that, but the recording will be available. Yeah, I think the recording will be available.
Will definitely be available. I'm also not sure about the other.
Yeah, I don't think we've given out the slides before. We've just given people a link to the to the recording.
I thought that would be the answer. Are there any specific questions for Ken? I can see lots of thank yous coming up on the chat.
Oh, okay. No specific questions.
Questions coming through. No hands going up either.
Nobody want to ask a question?
Ravash wants to ask you a question.
Yes.
Ravash, you want to ask your question?
Just unmute. Do we have to unmute?
Okay, he's typed it into the chat, Ken. Any on planning, unbiased, while being involved in supply and demand side of the business?
Okay, I think what you're asking is it if you have one person that organizes or plans the supply and the demand, it's not a good idea. There are two very different disciplines. In fact, you should have, in my opinion, in a reasonable sized company, you should have a demand planner whose job is to provide the consensus demand plan to the business. And then you've got a supply planner who is basically your master production scheduler. And I have seen in business where these two people are the same person. And quite honestly, sometimes you're not quite sure which hat you're wearing. Am I wearing the demand hat, or am I wearing the supply hat today? They're two very different disciplines. And in my opinion, there should be two different people. Demand planning reports to sales and marketing, and the master production schedule will report to the operation. I don't know, is that what you were getting at, Ravesh? I don't know. Did we get an answer? I can't see whether we got an answer.
I can just check. Yes, that was quite helpful. I'm currently involved with both.
Yes. Well, you need to cut yourself down the middle and get two half hats. It does happen in a lot of businesses I see where one person is doing both jobs. And yeah, in a very small business, maybe you have to do that. But in larger businesses, it should be totally separate, in my opinion. Good. No other questions?
Okay.
Nothing else in the chat there?
No, I don't see anything else in the chat.
Okay.
Ken, I think a huge thank you from all of us for...
Pleasure.
There's a question. Where does marketing fit in the management of inventory or forecasting?
Okay, well, marketing fits in the forecasting side. Sales and marketing is responsible for the consensus demand plan on the business. That's their job, to tell the supply side of the business what they think they're going to be able to sell in the business. So that's their job. Their job is to do the statistical forecasting and create that consensus demand plan for the business. So if we have a reasonable demand plan, then we can create a reasonable supply plan on the other side to support that demand plan. But I see a lot of sales and marketing people don't like forecasting because they always get told off because they got it wrong. And so somebody has to forecast in the business. If sales and marketing are not forecasting, then somebody in the factory is saying, well, we got to try and decide what it is to make. So let's make this, or let's make that, which may not be what the sales and marketing people want. Good point. Okay. It's always a contentious issue. Yeah. But that's sales and marketing's job, is to provide a consensus demand plan for the business. That's their ultimate objective. Okay.
Okay,
Tim, I see Tim's online here, our latest quiz champion. There's Tim, I think. Yeah.
Ken, I think a huge thank you from all of us at SAPEX for doing the presentation today, and a huge thank you to Liesel, who introduced you earlier on. It's always nice to have volunteers who are willing to share their knowledge and expertise with the community. And it's something we really, really do appreciate. So thank you for that, Ken.
Absolute pleasure.
Someone popped up the slide with the next session and it vanished again.
Yeah, it did vanish, didn't it?
There we go.
Yeah. There we
the
go.
next session is around manufacturing and resource control on Thursday, the 11th of November. And again, I think it's just important to highlight that these sessions are targeted at small and medium-sized businesses from two perspectives. The one perspective is those individuals who are directly working in these businesses for you to learn and grow, and also from a supplier development perspective. So if you're involved in a big corporate, it's really important that we give you the tools required to grow the supply chains at your suppliers in your supply development programs. So we're happy to help with both of those elements through the SMME development program. And if you do have any further questions, you can either connect with us via the website or contact one of our team members who are really, really awesome and will help you in however they can. So Ken, a huge shout out and thank you for today. I know it's a lot of your effort and energy. And thank you who have provided the material and are one of our learning providers on the SMME program.
Good. Okay. Keep well, everyone. And yeah, I'm always available if you've got any questions.